There we go.
Yep.
So, hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. To start off with, do you want to just say your name and where you are, please?
Yeah. Yep, my name is Jack Aylward. I have a small practice in Gestalt therapy in New Jersey in the United States.
And where are you right now?
I'm home at my home in Watchung, New Jersey.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me.
No.
The first question that we have for you is pretty basic one, pretty fundamental, I guess you could say. And it's, who are you? Who are you as a person, as a human being? What are your interests, your qualities, your passions, your values? Whatever you'd like to say about yourself.
That's a lot of space to fill in. Other than being a psychologist and having been one for many years, I'm also involved in a lot of other community-based types of things like art centers and things like that. My values are basically in the radical anarchistic school of thought, which I think is very much connected to Gestalt therapy, and particularly Paul Goodman. I published a couple of books where Goodman has a very strong presence in, and he's someone that I really have followed, not only with respect to Gestalt therapy, but also in terms of political, his social issues, and his intellectual contributions. I remember someone said about him one time that he's probably the most important mind of the 20th century that you've never heard of. And most people didn't hear of him and still don't hear of him, even the people who read the Gestalt book, the 1951 tome that he basically wrote. And I've been on a crusade to get a lot more publicity for him, both within the Gestalt community and outside of it. So I've been very busy doing that.
So radical anarchy and social activism, would you say?
Right, and a strong sense of social activism.
Okay.
Right.
So another question would be, what comes to mind as an event or a set of circumstances in your life that have influenced who you are, and maybe where some of these values and ideas come from?
And what, the last time I didn't hear the last part?
An event or a set of circumstances in your life that have really influenced who you are or who you've become.
Well, okay. Well, I think Gestalt therapy has a lot to do with that. I had no idea what Gestalt therapy was all about, and I was looking around for a sampling of therapies when I was looking for. I was in the psychoanalytic movement for a while, and I got very much bothered by it and by its interpretive nature. And I saw an ad in the paper, a local ad, that Fritz Perls was appearing at this high school and giving a lecture. And then for those of you who apply early, we're looking for people to sit in a group of 8 with Fritz Perls and be therapized, I guess, by him. So I didn't know who he was or what he was all about. So I said, well, I'm not doing much of anything. Let me try that. Well, it was probably the most excruciatingly painful and most enlightening moment of my life. He attracted, at the high school, he had 400 people in the audience. I mean, that's back in 1968, by the way. And then we went back to the center, and there were 6 of us in the group, and Fritz. And I must say I was very proud of myself. I didn't do a bit of work because I was quite taken aback by what was going on. There was a guy next to me. I remember his name, and this is 1968. And he was eating an apple, and Fritz said, you know, "Who wants to work?" So he got up and he sat in the chair with his apple and he was eating it. And Fritz looked at him and he said, "Get out of the chair. You're here to drive me crazy. You're not here to work." So I'm looking around, where's the therapy in all of this? And I sat there for a while and I watched some beautiful clinical work being done, but I certainly didn't have the self-support to be able to get up and jump in an empty chair. So after the meeting was over, Natalie Mann was there, because I think they were dating at that time, Fritz and Natalie. And I asked her, I said, you know, what the hell's going on here? She says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, this place seems very crazy to me. She said, well, maybe it's you. Maybe you're crazy. I said, well, maybe I am. What do you think I ought to do about it? She said, well, why don't you come and see me? So I set up an appointment, and I was in therapy with her for a short period of time because she moved to Vancouver and lived in a tent up some mountain in Vancouver. And then I went into therapy with one of his trainees, Larry Kestner, and we got along very well. And he thought I would be a good addition to the center. So I was a part-time practitioner there. And when he left in 1978, I bought the place and I took over and I ran the place, and I still run the place. I'm still known as Plainfield Consultation Center. But that truly was the most interesting point in my life in terms of moving me into a place in a very odd way that I never expected to go to.
Yeah, because of an ad in the paper. That's
yes, an ad in the paper, in the way at the back of the paper too. No big pictures of them, just a little square thing that this was going on at the Plainfield Consultation Center in the community was the name of the part of the paper that I read.
wow.
And then that just set me going, and and it was the most transformative experience I think I've had, both professionally and personally, not just professionally. I fell in love with Gestalt therapy after a while.
Okay. Well, another question would be, I'm sure you've run into quite a number of interesting individuals in the course of your life, but who comes to mind as a person who's really had an influence on you?
A person, well, Larry for sure, Larry Kestner for sure. We had a therapist that worked at the center, and Natalie, I think, brought him in, and his name was Dr. Gary Riarth, and he was a dog rib Indian from Yellowknife, Canada, which, as you know, is way the hell up there. And he was given the role as a family therapist, and he was deaf. He couldn't hear a thing. And he was an incredibly spiritual human being. And he fit into Gestalt therapy, although he didn't identify with it necessarily. But he taught me a great deal about the flexibility. For instance, they used to give him the kids who were sent to therapy by the courts, and these were tough kids, And he was in his late 50s at that point, and he'd never tell them he was deaf, and he would walk them down to his office, and there was a closet at the end of the hallway, and you made a left, and his office was on the right. Well, if this kid was a problem, he'd open the closet, he'd put the kid in the closet, and he'd shut the closet, and he'd lock it. And he'd listen to all the noise, and he'd put his hand up on the door so he could kind of feel whatever the kid was doing. And he let them know, he said, listen, I'm deaf, I can't hear a thing you're saying, but if you knock twice and promise you're going to be a good patient, I'll let you out. And
okay.
yes. And I mean, he probably could have gotten in a lot of trouble for that, but he wasn't a member of any particular association or organization, or I don't even think he had the credentials to be a dog catcher, but he was a very, very interesting guy. And he was with us for many years, and then he had to leave because he was a native of Canada, and when he came to America, he decided he was not going to get citizenship because he was a native of North America, and he didn't recognize any other countries in North America, so he had to leave. So I think he wound up in Central America where he died. But for years, those kids would come and ask for him.
Wow.
Yeah, and they'd come and he'd let them sleep in the place. He'd let them have it as a haven if they got into trouble in between sessions. And it started to show me the importance of connecting the therapy with the community, and also in order to be very effective. And at that point, community things and being part of politics and social things was taboo in most therapies.
Mm-hmm. Very sort of separate church and state kind of idea, right?
And he also taught me a great deal about the Indian culture. And I got very involved in that. And I was with the American Indian movement for many years. And so that he was probably one of the most influential people I've ever met.
Okay. Well, another question would be, how did you get into Gestalt beyond that? Like, what did you start doing with it yourself? Once you got in, you took the center. And what is your thing? I
Well,
guess is the question. What is your thing within Gestalt?
my thing at that point when I got into it was doing weekend marathon workshops, doing therapies with groups from Friday night into Sunday afternoon. And this was very popular back then. And I really thought it had potential because it was a larger experience, and it also could connect to community in a lot of ways because of the stuff that went on in between the major sessions between the people. And I worked, and Larry and I we did a lot of those. And then when he left, I looked around for some people, and nothing clicked. And then I was running a massage workshop at the center for a couples massage workshop, and it was a nude workshop. And this guy walks in with his girlfriend, and the workshop went very well. It was an overnight massage workshop. So the next morning at breakfast, she says to me, she says, I think you and my partner would work very well together. I said, really, who's your partner? She said, Bud Feeder. I said, well, I've heard his name, but at that point, he was part of a very prestigious, and he was not the Bud Feeder we know in the Gestalt community, but he was in a transition point at that time. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. So I gave it a try, and Bud and I were together for 20 years before he died. And that was really, his work as a group therapist was just second to none. And I learned so much from him. And together we developed different kinds of approaches and styles that we used for most of those years that worked well.
Okay. So I'm wondering what it is that you have taken from Gestalt. How would you say that it's affected you, having spent all of these years in it and around it, doing different things?
Well, my lifestyle has changed dramatically as a result of it. In terms of my connection with professional associations and things like that, and the way I ran my practice, I was not very, and I'm still not very enchanted by the major organizations that certify therapists and all that kind of stuff. And I don't believe you have to have a degree to be a therapist, or it has to be a particular degree. And so I've kind of been an outsider in the professional communities, although I did serve as the editor for the New Jersey Psychological Association for 14 years. We had a journal that came out 3 times a year. And I enjoyed that because I told them, if you want me to do this job, because nobody else wanted to do the job, and I certainly understand why, it was a lot of work. But I said, you've got to leave me alone. Do not bother me. If you bother me, I quit. Oh. Well, what if we have criticism? I said, then you call me and we sit and we talk about it, but we don't go through committees, and they went for it. So I was able to squeeze myself into a fairly bureaucratic kind of position without too much difficulty. But outside of that, I avoid those things like the plagues. And being a member of AAGT, and I was with Joe Wysong at the Gestalt Journal for many years, I really prefer that model, professional connection across all lines of degrees and backgrounds and associations and their styles. So I've been very connected to that type of conference. I think I've only missed one AAGT conference at all. And the years at the Gestalt Journal, which were not terribly easy years, I really felt that I wanted to make a contribution to Gestalt being seen as a major approach in the psychotherapeutic community.
And during the course of all of this, what would you say some of the challenges that you've run up against within Gestalt have been?
Oh.
Without naming names, right? But
running that was almost a steady stream of experience, and especially in the Gestalt journal.
Mhm.
It was a very difficult place to be, and it was run autocratically. It was not very friendly community. And then the transition between that and the members who came to our conferences, who then eventually formed AAGT. That transition was very difficult. I mean, I had major brouhahas with a lot of the people in terms of supporting them while they were doing that.
Mhm.
But I hung in there. I mean, I saw a lot of nasty stuff, and it never stopped me from wanting to make sure that the transition was not only as smooth as possible, but also encapsulated and grew in a way that it did grow. Like when Joe Melnick came out with the Gestalt Review, you know, the Gestalt Journal guy said, it's never going to work. You can't do that. There's not enough research for that. Well, how many years later? It's still going.
Yeah, I think it worked.
Yeah, I think it worked. And that's where I wanted it to go. I wish it would have had a smoother transition, but it was a very, very difficult time, not just for me, but in the Gestalt community in general. I gave a lot of time for during those years to make that transition happen.
And I have another question that's kind of large, but I actually want to ask it in a couple pieces because I'm interested about different parts of you and your work. So I'm going to ask, to start off with, on a professional level, what would you say one of your more satisfying or greatest achievements as an experience has been professionally?
I would say the work I did in the encounter groups and the weekend marathons.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, in fact, one time Bud and I actually did a week-long marathon.
Wow.
Which we both said we would never do again. But to see where it could go with that much time and with that much intervention into places that I would never be able to see in individual therapy because of the arrangement of that type of therapy. And it took a lot of work and a lot of regressive stuff, and it was very rewarding, but you know, it was just a difficult process, but a very rewarding one. But that's what the group work and the group work over time were really my desires at that point.
Could you say a little bit more about groups? Like, I know there's so much more in your experience. I just wonder what you could say about how it's been or what it's meant for you or what you see in groups. Why is it that that's become such a big part of your practice?
Because I'm a big believer that as a therapy, we need to grow into a better and bigger sense of contributing to community and bringing community into the therapy. Like socio-political issues and models like that. Something I find to be very difficult to integrate into individual therapy, but a lot easier to process through groups, especially if they're together for an intense period of time. Like if you put the question out there, what type of social issues do you think are important in order to help you support the growth you've made in this particular group? You know, and how do you think you could get that? Because if you look at Gestalt therapy, it's one of the only therapies that's ecological in its approach. I mean, if you see self-functioning as something that where the self changes and is of the boundary. So it's of the boundary of the individual and the field. So the field becomes part of that individual's functioning at any given point in time. And there are a lot of therapists who say that the political and the social should stay out of therapy. Well, I mean, if that's their orientation, I certainly respect it. But the fact is, according to our theory, it's there, whether you recognize it or not. To me, it's the elephant in the treatment room. It's always there because you can't have, and Goodman was a big believer in this, you can't have sane people in a crazy culture.
Not for long.
No, not for long. And unless you make the changes, and you know, he said this when he moved away from the Freudian model. He said, I can't imagine that Freud never considered the idea that in order to be maximally effective, the therapy needs to be in the community as well as in the individual's experience.
Mhm.
You know, he worried about what the person was going to look like the next week they came in for a session because of the interference from negative social issues that they were fighting. And of course, if you know Goodman, he was a pacifist and he was a social activist.
Right.
And
Like, I mean, I'm just imagining in the time somebody coming in and being affected by Vietnam happening.
right.
It's very immediate. It's not abstract. It's not like
Right.
reading Goodman 20, 30 years later.
Yeah, right. Especially in today's environment. I mean, look at Black Lives Matter. Look at the people that are in. How do you miss that as a therapeutic issue? I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and to do that, but you know, I mean, psychotherapy started with Freud. You know, and he was in the back of you. You were on the couch. You didn't even see him. You know, and I understand why that was necessary back in the Victorian age. But then when we hit the humanistic stuff in the 60s, that's where all of this stuff started to come out. And I think it needs to, because with technology and communication issues, you know, I never knew what Marshall McLuhan's book, the media is the message. I had no idea back then what it was in the 60s. This is what it was. The media is now the message. Therefore, it needs to be part of what we do as therapists and incorporate that into the work we do.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I like to go.
And I'm wondering how you live your life. I mean, I know what's normal for me. I know how I go about things. I know how I structure. But I'm wondering about you. How would you say that you live your life? I mean, involving yourself in political and therapy and community. What is your life like? What are you like in that life?
What am I like? I like to be involved in those type of activities you just mentioned, but I don't like taking on leadership roles in that, because that then starts a kind of vertical type of thing where I like the horizontal stuff. So I like to go in and contribute what I can and work with it to see if it can manifest itself in many ways without being in the bureaucratic structure. I mean, even like in AAGT, I have no interest in ever running for any office. And it's not that I don't like the organization. I love the organization. I just don't like being stuck in that box. So I don't like to be stuck in boxes in general. And I feel Gestalt therapy and the kind of socio-political stuff that flows from that allows for that freedom of movement for me without getting stuck in a box.
Okay. I'm also wondering about how you live where you are as an American man. What is that like for you?
Not very satisfying. I mean, I agree with Allen Ginsberg, the poet Allen Ginsberg, who said nationality is a disease. And now it's even more so. And I have dual citizenship. I have citizenship in Ireland as well. And I was seriously considering going there a while back, but something happened with the house I was buying, and it never came through. But I'm not terribly patriotic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't have an identification on that level. I think it was George Bernard Shaw who once said, "The world would be a much quieter place if patriotism were plucked from the human race."
It's very noisy.
Yes,
Very noisy stuff.
right, and senseless on many levels.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't get involved in the administrative aspects of those kinds of things, but I do have a lot of contact with the context of it.
Mm-hmm. And the other part of that was, as an American man, I'm also interested in how you experience yourself or understand yourself within your gender or in your masculinity.
That's funny. That issue just came up today in our peer supervision group. In many ways, camaraderie is very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Connection with others, and I think there's something in that that's masculine. You know, I'm not talking about like women I see get together a lot on the basis of their interests, not necessarily on their being a part of something like that,
Okay.
you know? And as an American man, that's kind of hard to think through. I mean, I have a son that lives in Australia, so I spend a month every year in Australia. And I see a difference there. Men are far more open and far more available and far more willing to express their vulnerabilities that I don't think a lot of American society is built on a very hierarchical level. It's a very prejudiced country. I mean, this new thing about, Black Lives Matter. I mean, we've been segregated. We've never been unsegregated in this country, and yet we want to see it in a different way. And I'm very optimistic about the fact that that's now changing, especially now with the new vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, and the excitement that is drawing.
Yes.
So I would like to see a lot of change. In fact, years ago, I wrote a book called the Human Liberation Group, where I brought men and women during the women's liberation movement, and I would do a 10 3-hour sessions of work with men and women in different scenarios, fish bowls and things like that. And I sent the book out to Robert Spitzer in California, and he lost the book with 100 pages. It never got published. But I found that to be very opening for a lot of people to realize that a lot of the sexual roles that we take on are not anything natural, but they're attributed to us by our culture.
Okay. Well, another question, I guess it's one of the last questions that I have on my list, which is what's next for you? What's coming up? What are you planning on doing, or where's your interest going, I guess is a way of saying it.
Staying alive.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm 79. I'll be 80 in March.
Mm-hmm.
And, that decade hasn't been good to family members of mine.
Yeah.
And dealing with that. And I do want to practice. I mean, I gave up my office 2 years ago, but I took a cadre of people with me who I've been working with for a while. Not that I needed to do that, but I certainly wanted to do that. I'm certainly happy that I did. And so that, and just looking at the whole issue of, somebody told me to read Ram Dass's book, Walking Each Other
Home. Yeah.
Yes, and so I'm kind of getting into that modality right now. And
And how is that? How is that for you?
Well, it excitingly scary in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Bud's death was very, 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 had a big impact on me. I mean, we were very, very close friends. And then I've lost 2 or 3. My secretary died in COVID, and I realize it's not just age, it's taking care of yourself and things like this. And I think one of the ways I do take care of myself is continuing a little bit with my professional life. So at least I have something to talk about with everybody else. And so looking at that, and I have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren, and I see them. Yeah, I go down to Australia every year, and my granddaughters are here in New Jersey. So, I'm starting to get pulling into the home as the home stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Rooms.
That sounds kind of ominous, I guess.
Yes, ominous, but understandable. I mean, how long?
Right. I mean, it's understandable, but naming it is, that's a.
Right. I mean, look at Eric Polster. He's 90-something. He's just had a book put out.
Right.
So, that has really crossed my mind recently. So.
And the other half of that question, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, it was the other half of that question is what you think is next for Gestalt, where you think it could or should be going in these circumstances in the world right now.
I think I would love to see it fill its potential as a very important social movement, and one that can integrate those kind of dynamics and issues into the therapeutic process.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see more of that. I mean, I talked about it in my book on anarchy and Gestalt therapy, and to just take it in as yet one more step to personal growth for people in terms of taking what they've got from their therapy and making it kind of appear in important social movements and options for people. You know, I mean, the best society is one that allows the most freedom to the most people to be who they are and do what they want without interference.
Right.
And I think Gestalt does that. Theodore Roszak, in his book, The Song of the Earth, when he was talking about the ecological movement, he said the only therapy that really addresses these problems is Gestalt therapy, because their theory takes into consideration the importance of the field. We need to do more of that.
I agree.
Right.
I agree. Well, I still have the other half of that other question, which is about one of the more satisfying moments. And I'm wondering now about that in yourself as a person, not in a clinical sense. I mean, you, Jack, what would you say has been one of the highlight experiences of your life for you?
Oh, I've had a lot, both negative and positive highlights, but
Highlights, lowlights?
yeah. The most transformative probably was my first marriage. My wife died in 1996 at the age of 52. And we had a relationship that was just magic. It was magic, just magic. I mean, and she became a therapist and she became part of the Gestalt community, although she was more Rogerian than she was Gestalt. And she had some issues with some of the carrying on that went in the Gestalt community, but appreciated for what it did for me and what she did learn from it. And then when she died, that was in 1996. That was a big shift for me. And then I'm married again to a wonderful lady, and never thought I would be again. And yeah, and very, very happy. So those were really important, at one time, essential systems for me.
That's interesting. I say experience, and sometimes people, tell a story, climb a mountain, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just interesting that you go right to a relationship.
Right, exactly. I define myself very strongly through all of my relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They've been the most important thing to me, based on a lot of crap in my own life from a long time ago. But yeah, I would have to say that that's my main identification in life.
Well, then I feel especially honored that we have this little friendship. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so do I.
And I wanted to say that. So
yes.
Yeah, this project is one of those things that I wanted to invite Bud to join.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
so it's kind of one of those.
Of course you would have.
Well, of course, but it's just that unfinished business of all of those, conversations I haven't quite gotten the opportunity to have.
Right.
And yeah, Bud was a good kick in the ass from the great beyond to say, do it now.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I think that all gelled for me at our Mexican weeks.
Yeah.
You were there with your family. We were next door.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's where, and then when you did that great job for the conference in Toronto.
Oh, thank you.
Which I didn't
really get to be there for, but yeah.
No, that was where Bud was. That's where his last stand was at the conference, and I wanted to be there for that. In fact, I had to give up my workshop, and then I said to the AAG committee, I said, "Listen, I want to do the workshop I never did with Bud." Okay, fine, we'll do it. We'll do it in Ireland. Well, and that got scrapped. So I got to hang around to do it.
Right. I mean, you can't leave things unfinished. Now it has to happen.
Oh, especially that.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything you think is missing from your person, your practice?
No, I think you covered all of it beautifully.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Should we leave it there then?
Yes, I think so.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Okay, take care.